During our argument, Jenna grabbed my arm and dragged me outside. She pushed me into a dirty shed that was far from clean. I tried to fight back, but she was stronger. I was stuck in the dark, cold shed and started to feel sick. I was scared and didn't know how to get out. Then I remembered something in my back pocket. I quickly checked and found it. My name is Sophia Johnson. I'm 42 years old and work as an administrative assistant at a company. My job isn't too hard, but it's never boring. I find it fulfilling, and my coworkers are really nice. Even though it's not common, I genuinely enjoy my job every day and don't find it a burden. One thing that worried me was that I wasn't married. Watching my friends get married and live happily made me feel both envious and a bit sad. The idea of spending my life alone was frightening, and I wondered if any man would ever be interested in me. I constantly worried about the future. A few years later, I did get married. His name is Robert Johnson, and he's 7 years older than me. He works at one of our client companies and started visiting often because he was the main contact for the company I worked at. We were both nervous at first, but we grew closer and started dating. After a few years, we got married, and I was incredibly happy. I hoped we would create a happy home together. Robert has a 15-year-old daughter named Jenna from his previous marriage. He had been honest about Jenna from the start, and I had met her a few times. Jenna is very shy and always sticks close to Robert. Seeing their close bond warmed my heart. I hoped that once we lived together, Jenna and I would become close. After marrying Robert, I moved into his home with Jenna and decided to quit my job to become a homemaker. I did my best to make sure Robert and Jenna were comfortable. I cooked healthy meals and kept the house clean. It might seem like ordinary stuff, but I thought it would make their lives better. However, living with a family was very different from being on my own. Every little chore became much harder. What helped me during those tough times was our cat Oliver. He had always been at Robert's house. Oliver wasn't slim, and he had a habit of sneaking out, but I hoped he would stay put as long as I was home. Even though I had many exhausting days, Oliver's presence always comforted me. Life after marriage was challenging, but I was happier than when I was single. Still, something bothered me. Jenna seemed to dislike me. When I tried to talk to her, she would look confused and ignore me. I'd say things like "welcome home" or ask about her day, but she wouldn't respond and would go straight to her room after petting Oliver. I thought Jenna was just having a hard time accepting me. She was 15, and it must have been tough for her to adjust to a new woman in the house who wasn't her real mother. I had met her a few times before the wedding, but she never seemed to warm up to me. I tried hard to get Jenna to like me, but no matter what I did, she never warmed up to me. She always ignored me and seemed unhappy whenever she was around. When Robert was home, she talked a little, probably to avoid making him upset, but it was better than not talking at all. After being married to Robert for about 4 years, the gap between Jenna and me never seemed to close. I still didn't know what her favorite food was or what she liked to do for fun. The only thing I knew for sure was that she loved Oliver, our cat. I had gotten used to Jenna's unfriendly looks, which had been intimidating at first. Then, unexpectedly, when Jenna started high school, she spoke to me. I was surprised and my voice went up in surprise. I wondered if she was finally opening up. I waited eagerly to hear what she had to say. But what Jenna said was completely unexpected. "How long are you going to stay in this house? Can you leave soon? You're in the way." I was shocked. Being suddenly told to leave was a huge surprise. I was confused and hurt by Jenna's sudden comment. I struggled to find the right words, but Jenna started explaining her feelings, giving me insight into why she had acted that way. She said, "I love my dad, but it was just the two of us before. Now I have to live with an old woman like you acting all motherly. I can't handle it. I thought if I ignored you, you'd break up with him. Was school fun for you? Seriously gross." Her harsh words left me speechless. She continued, "You act so superior, but it's been really hard for me. Maybe you should think about your worth, old lady." Jenna seemed satisfied with the pain she had caused and walked away with a smile I had never seen before. Her hurtful words and suggestion to question my worth echoed in my mind. Tears started streaming down my face. Despite my efforts over the past 4 years to gain Jenna's approval, she never accepted me. I didn't know how to handle the situation with Jenna now. I tried to find answers, but none came. From that day on, Jenna continued to insult me. Jenna often told me how bad my cooking was, saying it was awful. She would say things like, "It's sad for Dad. There are so many better people out there. With his charm, he could remarry easily." Jenna would say these things behind Robert's back, but act like my cooking was great when he was around. She would say, "Sophia's cooking is really delicious," and then quickly change her tune. This constant switch left me confused. I tried to stay composed, but Jenna's harsh comments never stopped. I thought about talking to Robert about how I was feeling, but he always seemed too busy with work. I didn't want to add to his stress. I figured if I just put up with it, things would get better, especially if Jenna eventually moved out. 5 years later, Jenna went to college and then got a job nearby. At the same time, Robert's business trips started lasting longer, sometimes 2 weeks or even a month. As Robert was away more often, Jenna's abuse became worse. Without Robert around, Jenna let her frustration show even more. She complained about the food, saying things like, "It's terrible. Can't you do something about it?" and then left her unfinished meal to go to Oliver's place. I looked at the leftover food and set down my knife and fork. I had put up with so much, but that day, I finally reached my breaking point. The constant insults and cold treatment made me feel more like a maid than a mother. There wasn't a specific trigger, but while Jenna was insulting me again, I lost it and said, "Just get out already. You're so annoying. You always tell me I'm a bother and to leave. Enough is enough." Jenna was surprised by my response but quickly fired back with harsh words. "Why are you suddenly talking back? I can't deal with this," she said. "If you can't stand it, why don't you move out? You have a job, you have money, and you'd be fine on your own. I'm a homemaker. I can't just leave." I thought I might have hit a nerve since Jenna didn't respond, and I could see she was angry. "Lost your tongue," I taunted. "What happened to all that energy?" Just as I thought I had the upper hand, Jenna suddenly grabbed my arm and squeezed it painfully. I protested, but she ignored me and dragged me outside. She took me to a small storage shed and pushed me inside. I tried to resist, but her younger strength overpowered me. In no time, I was locked inside the shed. I banged on the walls, pleading for her to let me out, but Jenna didn't seem to care. Jenna said, "I can't let you out, even if you ask. By the way, I haven't mentioned it, but I'm going on a trip for 3 days. Try to survive in the shed." 3 days? Are you serious? I asked. "What about Oliver?" Jenna replied, "There's an automatic feeder for him, so he'll be fine." Her comment was completely irresponsible. "You're being so irresponsible," I shouted. Jenna just told me to shut up and added mockingly, "That's the punishment for stealing my dad from me." Then she left, and I was left alone in the dark, cramped shed. I felt cold and began to feel sick. The thought of being stuck there for 3 days was overwhelming. I started panicking and banging on the walls, but it didn't help. Suddenly, I remembered the weight in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out my smartphone. Feeling relieved, I called my nearby friend, Sarah Turner. "Hey Sarah, it's Sophia." Sarah answered, "Sophia, it's rare for you to call. What's up?" I quickly explained my situation, and Sarah agreed to help. She'd arrived within minutes. When the shed door opened, the bright sunlight was blinding. Even though I had only been in the shed for a few hours, it felt like days. I thanked Sarah, and she took me to her house. I didn't have my keys, and Robert was away on a business trip. Given all that, Sarah told me Sarah said I could stay at her place for as long as I needed. When I got out of the shed, I noticed Jenna was gone, likely already on her trip. Next, I needed to contact Robert. I sent him a message explaining what happened and where I was. Although I couldn't ask him to come back, I hoped he would. A few minutes later, Robert called. "Hello, Sophia. Are you okay?" "Robert, I'm fine, thanks," I replied. "I'm heading home now to pick you up. Stay at your friend's place a bit longer. It will take me about 3 hours to get there, so hang tight. Forget about work. I'm on my way." Robert sounded worried and was making an effort to come back. I thanked him and hung up. Sarah said, "You can stay here for another 3 hours. Honestly, you have such a caring husband. I can see why Jenna might be a bit jealous." "Jealous?" I asked. "Yeah, jealous. From what I've heard, she probably feels that way because you married her beloved dad." Now that it was mentioned, it did seem like jealousy. But Sarah added, "Just because she's family doesn't mean you should hold back from telling her off when needed. It's for her own good." I agreed. No matter how long we'd lived together, acting out of anger wasn't going to help. I needed to find a way to get through to Jenna. I thought of a somewhat forceful plan and shared it with Sarah. "That's a pretty good idea. Give it a shot," Sarah said, seeming amused and supportive. 3 hours later, Robert arrived at Sarah's house and knocked on the door. "Are you okay, Sophia?" he asked. "I'm fine, thank you. But you were at work," I replied. "You matter more to me than any job," Robert said. He had decided to take a few days off work to sort things out. "Is it okay for you to take time off like that?" "They said they'd manage," Robert answered. "I think I need to have a serious talk with Jenna." I explained everything to Robert, what Jenna had done, how it ended up trapped in the shed, and all the details of the situation. Robert listened carefully and then apologized. I'm sorry for not noticing earlier. It's not just your fault. I should have seen something was wrong. I'm truly sorry. The mood was heavy until Sarah chimed in. Why the long face? You're going to scold Jenna, right? Buck up. Her words gave me a boost. You're right, I said. We thanked Sarah and headed home together. When Jenna opened the door to the shed, her face was a mix of shock and confusion. The sight inside was exactly what I had hoped for. The shed looked ransacked, and the smell was overwhelming. What's this? Jenna muttered, stepping back from the stench. She struggled to process what she was seeing. Scattered items, overturned objects, and the intense, unpleasant odor of decay. I stayed hidden, watching her reaction unfold. Jenna's initial shock gave way to a more frantic concern. She stumbled backward, her face pale, as she tried to take in the scene before her. This can't be real, she whispered, her eyes darting around the shed. What happened here? Jenna's panic was palpable. She rushed back to the house, calling out for Robert, her voice tinged with urgency and fear. I could hear her shouting, Dad, something's wrong, you need to come see this. Robert and I exchanged glances. He looked resolute but worried. As we approached, Jenna's distress grew more evident. She kept pointing at the shed, unable to articulate her fear clearly. When Robert saw the state of the shed, his concern shifted from surprise to anger. Jenna, what did you do? He demanded. Jenna, nearly in tears, shook her head. I didn't do this. I just came back and found it like this. I thought. She trailed off, unable to finish her thought as Robert's stern gaze locked onto her. I wanted to shock you into realizing how serious this situation is, I said, stepping forward. I didn't mean to cause you such fear, but I needed you to understand the impact of your actions. Jenna's anger melted into a mixture of guilt and fear. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't know. Robert interrupted, his voice firm but caring. Jenna, this has gone too far. You need to understand that your behavior has consequences. It's not just about you and me, it affects everyone around us. Jenna nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't realize it was this bad. I'm sorry, Safia. Robert wrapped an arm around Jenna, guiding her into the house. Let's talk about this properly. We need to figure out how to move forward from here. As they went inside, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I hoped this drastic measure would be the wake-up call Jenna needed, and that moving forward, we could start to rebuild our relationship on a better foundation. We walked over to Jenna, who looked stunned. I asked her how her trip went. Safia chimed in, Wait, Dad's here too. Jenna, we need to talk. Robert had a really scared look on his face, one I'd never seen before. Jenna seemed to understand why when she saw his face. She sat down on the sofa, looking upset. Robert said, You've done some terrible things to Safia. Jenna stayed quiet. Robert continued, You were really panicked earlier, thinking Safia might have died in there, but that wasn't it. So why were you so panicked in front of the shed? As we waited for Jenna to respond, she said something surprising. I thought Oliver was inside. Oliver. Why Oliver? We asked. Jenna explained, Oliver used to run away a lot. I thought maybe he had gotten into the shed and couldn't get out. But you should have been worried about Safia, Robert said. What if I hadn't come back? You forgot about Safia. I was shocked to hear Jenna have forgotten about Safia. I couldn't find the words. Robert was furious and said, I never thought you'd act like this. I'm truly disappointed. Jenna tried to explain, It's just that I felt like Safia was taking Dad away from me. Robert cut her off. You did something that could have had serious consequences just because you felt like it, and then you forgot about it. I never thought I raised you to be like this. Robert sighed, looking like he had given up on Jenna. Sensing this, Jenna stood up and tried to defend herself. Dad, don't say things like that. I love you so much, Jenna said. If Safia had just waited quietly for 3 days, I would have let her out. If Safia hadn't called her friend, none of this would have happened. Dad wouldn't have had to leave work early or take the day off. This is all your fault. Jenna continued, Wouldn't it have been better if you hadn't disliked me so much? Maybe if you hadn't locked me up, your wrongdoings wouldn't have been discovered. You act on your own but blame me for everything. She added, By the way, you were worried about Oliver, but didn't you once say it was okay to leave him alone for 3 days? That's just unthinkable. Do you realize you have a living creature to care for? If you truly cared, leaving him alone for 3 days wouldn't even be an option. And you don't even know what kind of food Oliver is eating now because Robert and I have been taking care of him. I thought you loved Oliver when we started living together, but now you only pet him when you feel like it and ignore him otherwise. It's actually quite funny how contradictory this all is. When I spoke up honestly, Jenna blushed with anger and said, Why do I have to hear this from you? You're a stranger who took my dad away. It's all your fault. I tried to respond, but Jenna got even more upset. Robert stepped in and said, You've been saying nothing but selfish things. How is it all Sophia's fault? I don't understand what you're thinking. Jenna, with tears in her eyes, clung to Robert, but he looked down at her coldly and said, Leave this house. Jenna was shocked and asked, Why all of a sudden? Robert said firmly, I can't keep someone in this house who endangers others' lives and then forgets about it. You need to leave now. Jenna tried to argue, but Robert shut her down, saying, You really think you have the right to talk back? You only think about yourself. Desperate, Jenna turned to me and said, Sophia, please say something. I replied, No, it's no use, just leave, like Robert said. Stop clinging to me just because Robert is angry. You really only think about yourself. Jenna left the house, dragging her suitcase and looking resigned. Even though she seemed lonely, I didn't feel sorry for her at all. After she left, I got flooded with emails and calls from Jenna. She sent me messages saying she was sorry and asking for forgiveness. The way she sent these messages, often in large batches or at all hours, really showed how self-centered she was. Jenna also updated me on her life. She was staying in a cheap motel while working but was struggling to find a better place. She was picky about things like having separate bathrooms and a clean environment. Even when she found a good place, the rent was too high for her. She sent the same updates to Robert, who was shocked. He wondered if she truly couldn't manage on her own or if she was just selfish. Regardless, I knew I would never let Jenna back into the house. I really wish Jenna would take some time to reflect on her actions. Since Jenna left, life has returned to peace. Robert still travels for work, but not as much as before, so we have more time to relax together. We don't have to be as careful around each other anymore, which is nice. Jenna never listened to our warnings, so in a way, I'm glad things turned out this way. Every day with Robert is pure joy. After finishing the housework and relaxing on the sofa, Oliver climbed onto my lap, meowed, and curled up to sleep. As I petted him, I found myself hoping for many more moments like this.